Husayn? Ishq. What is the highest level of ishq? Highest level is love. Love, highest level, tears, manifestation. So look and see. If it was just intellectual today, we may have been like other people. But today that love revives us. And so you notice, people when they come to the Majlis of Husayn, many of them are heartbroken. You know why? Because through the breaking of the hearts does man connect back to the Creator. Your wasila is Imam Husayn. This is the place where dua is answered. This is the place where miracles take place. And your tears, look at a tradition. Rasulullah looks towards Amir al-Mu'mineen. Imam had a friend who was a Christian. That Christian loved Amir al-Mu'mineen. Passes away. Rasulullah says to Amir al-Mu'mineen, he says, you want to see the maqam of your friend? He says, yes. He says, look and see. 4th level, heaven. 4th sky. Why? Milak is this. Love of Amir al-Mu'mineen, love of Ahlul Bayt. Why? Because this entire universe is created for the Ahlul Bayt. You think you can love Fatima and not achieve the 4th level, or the 5th level, or the 7th level? He says, this is your friend who was a Christian on the 4th level. On that 4th level, he sees that there was a dome. He was resting on that dome. Why? Ishq of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Wilayat of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Today, if we're going to go back, look, we can have discussions on philosophy and everything else. But the one thing that saves us and saves your children, believe me, in the time when there's dhalala, people going off the track, children going to places they shouldn't be going to, in places like this, what elevates you? Wilayah. Love, movement back. Let me give you a story. Amongst the miracles that takes place or took place recently, there was a book that was compiled. In that book, there was a Christian from Tehran. That Christian from Tehran, still alive. He says, why did I come onto the way of Husayn? He narrates a story. He says, I was a lorry driver. I used to drive lorries. He said, one day it so happened, there was a mountain, and I was going up on that mountain. Now the mountain was rather dangerous. He says, as I was going up on that mountain, my brakes gave way. Brakes failed. He says, as my van began to go spiraling out, I saw that there was the edge, and from the edge I would have fallen over. As it was going, he said, at that moment, I remembered just one thing. I remembered that in my youth, I used to see people saying, Ya Abul Fadl, Ya Abul Fasl, in Iran, in Tehran. Recently, he said, as my lorry was spinning and I was about to fall, he said, there was only one thing that came onto my tongue. He says, I said, Ya Abul Fadl, Ya Abul Fasl. He says, when I said that, he said, right on the edge, the lorry stops. He says, when the lorry stopped on the edge, and I was thinking how this happened, a voice came from above, and it said, are you okay? He said, I got out the lorry. I looked to see who it was. I looked up. In my heart, I felt this is Abul Fadl. He says, I went up to thank him. And when I went up, there was a tall man standing there. And so I moved towards him. And I said, was it you who helped me? He said, you called me. I came to you. He says, know one thing. Ahlul Bayt don't turn anyone away. In times of deep difficulty, call upon them and you'll see. Ahlul Bayt are there for you. If there's anything, take a lesson home today. Ahlul Bayt are there. You know what he says? He says, I fell on the man's feet. I was holding his feet and I got up to kiss his hands. Every time I tried to kiss his hands, he took a step back. And again, I moved forward to kiss his hands, he took a step back. And again, when I did it for the 3rd time, he looks at me, he says, what do you want from me? He said, I want to kiss your hands. He says, I don't have any hands, because my arms were chopped off. This man began to cry. He said, for a person not to have arms and to come and save me like this, that's ishq. Why? Know something. Ahlul Bayt don't turn anyone away, regardless of the pain that they have. It's a Christian. He saw this. It was in front of him. It's been recorded within the miracles of Abul Fadl al-Abbas. So now imagine this. Today you may be far away from your homes, wherever you may be. Understand this. These are the nights of miracles. These are the nights we've seen ourselves. A child who couldn't walk walks from the Majlis of Sayyid al-Shuhada. There's nothing which is impossible here. Everything becomes possible. You know what the criteria is? Heart needs to connect. And for me, it doesn't make a difference where I am in the world. When a night like this comes, no. These are the nights of Rahmah of Allah. This is why you focus. Why? Because you don't know who could be here. Which personality can be here. Let me tell you something. Ahlul Bayt like it when you talk to them. Ahlul Bayt like ishq. Hearts connect to hearts. Sometimes, you may notice, certain things people say, they seem strong, they seem offensive. But sometimes for Ahlul Bayt, they may accept it. Look, everything builds up to this. Your entire life, this is Ma'araj. Step by step you'll see. Then on the night of Ashura you'll ascend. Give you a story. There was a man in India, spent 30 years of his life to do what? 30 years. Please add a salawat, please. One more, please. Spends 30 years of his life. Gets enough wealth to go for the ziyarah of Sayyid al-Shuhada. 30 years later, he travels. Remember, you get one shot. Imagine now he's probably in his 60s. He says when he comes to Najaf and he realizes that the difference between Najaf and Karbala is only 80 kilometers or so, he comes to the door of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Looks up at the shrine of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Says, Mawla, I'm upset with you. People were listening. They said, what is he saying? He says, Mawla, I'm not going to come into your shrine because I'm upset. I call you in India, you come and help me. Hussein was calling you and you weren't coming to help him? Said it, he gets up and he goes. Imagine saying that. To who? Amir al-Mu'mineen. As we do, ziyarah finishes, we go to Kadhimiyah. Says this man goes towards Kadhimiyah. He sits there, he's thinking, he says, look, I've come all of this way, saving all of this money. It's not cheap. Cost me $1,000. All of this way from India, 30 years it took me. He said, maybe I should have just gone to do ziyarah of Amir al-Mu'mineen. He's there, he's crying. He thinks, what have I done? Just then when he's becoming despondent, he's thinking, I'm never going to come back again. There's a knock on the door. He opens up his room door. He sees outside standing there a man. He asks him a question. He says, who are you? He says, perhaps you didn't come to see me, but I've come to see you. I says, who are you? He says, I'm that Ali that you didn't come and see. Know something? Whenever somebody comes to do the ziyarah of my son Hussein, I come to do the ziyarah. Asks him a question. He says, Mawla, I have a question to ask you. Falls onto the floor, asks for forgiveness. He says, but why was it that you didn't come to help Hussein? Only 80 kilometers away. Why was it he didn't come? Not Amir al-Mu'mineen replies. He says, my Shia, I was there. Rasulullah was there. I was standing there when Asr time came. It was the Mashiach of Allah that I couldn't go any further. In fact, from Adam to Khatam, all of the Anbiya were there. And as Hussein was standing there alone, he was lonely. We couldn't go any further than that because the hukum of Allah wasn't there. And so he says one by one, every prophet ascended back up. They couldn't see what was going to happen. Amir al-Mu'mineen says to this person, as this person narrates, he says, eventually a time came where only 3 of us were standing there. Rasulullah, and I and Zahra. Said a time came when Hussein fell onto the ground. When Hussein fell onto the ground, Rasulullah turned his face away, couldn't see it anymore. I stood there, Zahra stood there. He says there was a time when Hussein was on a bed of arrows, and as he was on the bed of arrows, Shimr came walking towards him with a blunt knife in his hand. He says, I watched up to the stage when Shimr got onto the chest of my son Hussein. He says, as he got onto the chest of my son Hussein, when he grabbed the beard of Hussein, he says, even I turned my face away, I couldn't see it. He said, but it's a mother's heart that mother stayed there waiting. Right? Like, I can't complete that whole tradition. I can't complete the whole tradition. But the one thing I will say, how many trials and tribulations did that mother face, even to this day? Let me ask you a question. She forgets her own pain when she sees Amir al-Mu'mineen being dragged onto the road, right? She forgets her own pain when she sees Imam Hassan. One mother, so much pain. Let me give you two things so that you understand why it gladdens the heart of Zahra. Just two things. One thing is this. Shall I tell you? In the hadith, as Sulaym ibn Qais narrates, in the hadith it says Zahra was sitting there next to the grave of the Prophet. Amir al-Mu'mineen was being dragged by his neck onto the road. He says to Salman, leave me Salman, go towards the daughter of the Prophet. He says, why? Can't you see? Can't you see? The walls of the mosque are being risen. Goes running there. As he runs there, he says, just tell Zahra not to. Comes up. You know what Zahra was doing? She was holding on to the turba of the grave of the Prophet. She was about to raise her hands. Salman says, Amir al-Mu'mineen says, don't do anything. What does she reply? She says, Salman, my door was burnt down. I didn't say anything. My rib was broken. I didn't say anything. My Mohsin was shaheed. I didn't say anything. They slapped me on the face. I didn't say anything. My husband was dragged onto the road. I came for the sake of Ali. But if Ali doesn't want me to do anything, then I'll turn back. Turn back once. Why? Zahra's loneliness. Why? Her husband was dragged. You know what the second thing is? You know, fathers, some of you are sitting here with your sons. How old are your sons? Maybe 6, 7, 8, 10. Shall I tell you something? In the hadith it says when Zahra was lying on the floor, miscarrying, and she was holding a rib, they say somebody walked up. Imam Hassan was standing next to the door trying to protect his mother. He was only 5 years old. Why did Zahra cry for? This is why. Somebody came, grabbed Imam Hassan by the neck, chucked him onto the side. Imagine that mother watching. Right? But Hussein made her cry even more. What is it about Hussein? Today when you give condolences, who do you give condolences to? Zahra, yes. Amir al-Mu'mineen as well. Right? Ghurba of the Imam. What did Imam cry? If Zahra cried for Hussein, Amir al-Mu'mineen cried for Zainab. One daughter made Amir al-Mu'mineen cry. He would sit there on the musalla doing two things. One, praying that Allah gave him a son, Abbas, and then after that he would cry for Zainab. He would see the face of Zainab, he would start crying. When he ever saw Zainab in pain, he would start crying. A father finds it difficult to cry in front of his children. Do you know how difficult it was for Amir al-Mu'mineen to hold that back? He would go outside at night time, and you know what he would say? Look at the words of the Imam. He would say, "O desert, if you think you're lonely, look at the heart of Ali and see how lonely Ali is." It's difficult. Masa'ib of Ahlul Bayt are difficult. We haven't even started yet. This journey hasn't even started yet. These nights of tears, your tears are your way of connection. Shall I give you a tradition? follow me. We're going on this journey. But I want you to do one thing. Whenever your heart feels broken, ask Allah to make the Imam happy with us. They say dua becomes mustajab. The biggest dua is when the Imam becomes happy. Look, brothers and sisters, you know you're going through trial and tribulation. Hussein brings you here because he wants to answer your prayers. You know, you think that tears come into your eyes and Hussein is not watching? Let me give you a tradition. Sheikh Sadduq narrates this. There are a number of chains on this. Who is it? 8th Imam, Imam al-Rida alayhi salam. As the day comes, 1st of Muharram comes. Imam is sitting there, he's crying. Tears are flowing in his eyes. Flowing from his eyes until his beard is covered with tears. Ibn Shabib comes. Looks up at Mawla, says, Mawla, why are you crying so much for? Imagine. Just the words of the 8th Imam show how gharib Hussein is. He begins to cry. And as he cries, he says, Ibn Shabib, are you fasting today? Ibn Shabib says, no, Mawla, I'm not fasting. He says, do you not know what today is? 1st of Muharram, as in tomorrow. He says, Ibn Shabib, today was the day when Zachariah was in the Mihrab, he was praying, Allah give me a son. Old man, in his 90s praying. Allah accepted his prayer right away, gave him Yahya. 8th Imam is saying, Allah accepted the dua of Zachariah. He says, tell my Shia, if anyone has any haja in their heart, and the 1st of Muharram comes, fast on the 1st of Muharram. Who is saying this? 8th Imam. How much is he emphasizing this? Look at it and see. Look, remember something. Speech of the Imam is important. When he says something at the beginning and then he pumps it up afterwards, there's a reason why. Hukum of the Imam is that if you can fast on the 1st of Muharram, fast. Why? Look at afterwards what comes. Then he begins the discussion. He says, Ibn Shabib, this is for all of you now. He begins to cry. He says, Ibn Shabib, if ever you feel like crying, Ibn Shabib, if ever you feel like crying for anything, if your heart is broken, if there's pain, if life isn't going the way that it should do, maybe you're missing your parents, maybe your children are far away from you, maybe some tragedy is taking place. Ibn Shabib, if ever you feel like crying, even over yourself, cry over Hussein. Make the intention that you're crying over my Jad. That in itself is enough to show how madloom the Imam is. Why? If you can't cry over the Imam and you're crying over yourself, just make the intention. Even then the Imam will accept it. You know what he says? Tradition continues. It's a long tradition. I'm just going to mention one or two things in that set. He says, Ibn Shabib, cry over my Jad Hussein. Because my Jad Hussein was slaughtered like a sheep is slaughtered on the plains of Karbala. Ulama discussed this, right? They asked the question, why did Imam say slaughtered like a sheep? You know when you cut the throat of a sheep, you know what the first thing that happens? You see blood which sprays up. They said that when Imam's neck was cut in such a way, blood came and sprayed on his face. Asked the question. Ulama debated on this. Ibn Shabib asked, why? In another tradition, he says, why? Mawla, why is it? So he asked the question. He says, let me answer why. When you sacrifice a sheep, do you give it water? The answer is yes. We give it water. Why? Sunnah of the Prophet. Whenever you sacrifice a sheep, you give it water. Hey, ulama say. They say when Sayyid al-Shuhada was sacrificed in this way, he was thirsty. Ibn Shabib, when you slaughter an animal, is the knife sharp or is the knife blunt? The knife is sharp. It says when Shimr was sitting on the chest of Husayn, the knife was blunt. But you know what the most painful thing was? Painful thing was this. You know, we've seen ourselves, when you're slaughtering a sheep, let's say, hukum is that all of the other sheep are hidden. So they don't panic. They don't feel upset. Maybe a mother is watching. Have you seen? I've seen. A mother will give its life, even a sheep. Recently there was a documentary. A very famous picture was taken. 2 lions were eating the sheep from one side and the other because it stood there waiting for its children to run. Now imagine, a sheep feels that much pain for its child. You know what the tradition says? It says when Shimr was walking towards Husayn, Zainab was standing 70 paces away, and the only thing she was saying, Anta akhi, are you my brother? Why? Surrounded. People were chucking all sorts of things over her. Blood flowing from Husayn. You know what Husayn says just before he's killed? He just says one thing. He says, Zainab, I'm still alive. Go back to the tent. He says, Husayn's ghaira can't take it. Somebody asked a question though. They said, what do you mean that Husayn was slaughtered like a sheep? You know what the reply was? The reply was this. When a sheep is slaughtered, there's nobody to stop that sheep from being slaughtered. It says when Husayn was being slaughtered, people were saying, kill him quickly. Right? This is what begins Husayn's journey. The entire tradition of Ibn Shabib is a long one. If we get the time, we'll go into it. 2 things I'll say more. 2 things. My time is slipping away, maybe 5 minutes to go. I'll say 2 more things. If you ever want to know how to be next to Rasulullah, Hadith says, Sahih Sanad, says if you ever want to know how to be with Rasulullah and Ahlul Bayt in the hereafter, here says Ibn Shabib, give la'an on the killers of Husayn. Hadith says. And then it continues and it says, and if you want to know how to be connected, wasl to Husayn, go to the ziyar of Husayn. Just now, I was in Karbala, just recently. I saw that people who were poor, even the beggars, so one guy was putting some money to the side. I asked him a question. I said, what's this money that you're putting to the side? You know what he says? He says, Arba'in is coming. Zawar of Husayn will be coming. He says, I may be poor, I may not have any money, but I'm waiting for that moment when the Zawar of Husayn come to serve the Zawar of Husayn. Remember, people in Karbala today are ready. They're preparing for when you come. You'll see, as you begin to walk from Najaf to Karbala, small children, mothers will tie banners. People will have flags in their hands, and they'll begin to walk towards Karbala. One person will be cleaning your shoes. One person will be giving you dates. Remember something. Husayn's followers, he has a lot of murids. Ask yourself the question, what can we do for the sake of Husayn? What are we going to do in these 10 days? What are you going to do for the sake of Husayn? Look, usually I always give this story. I'm going to give it to you today. It's fitting today. Something that broke my heart a couple of years ago. We were walking from Najaf to Karbala. As we were walking, there are many occasions you just feel like crying. Ahl Iraq, the hospitality is amazing. Everything that they have for the Zawar of Husayn. We were walking, a small child, no older than 6 years old, came in front of us. His feet were blistered. You could tell he had no shoes on, his feet were blistered. And he has some tissues in his hand. He came towards me, he says, can you take a tissue? I looked at him, I said, son, why don't you keep it to yourself? We're your parents. You know what he replied? He said, ISIS killed my mother and my father. I'm the only one that's left. I said, son, why don't you go, sit down, rest? He said to me, Sayyid, I have nothing to give you. I've got no dates to give you. I've got no rice to give you. I don't have any water to give you. All I was given were these tissues. Take a tissue so on the day of judgment I can say to Fatima al-Zahra, even though I was orphaned, at least I did something for the Zawar of Hussein. At that moment, you can imagine, what do? Kiss the boy's hands, cry? You think if in the 21st century children are like that still, there's still hope for us. Still hope. These are those nights. I'm going to slowly bring our discussion to a conclusion. Prepare yourselves for these coming nights. Spiritually, there's an entire journey. There's a lot that we have to discuss. Keep that heart. Remember, Hussein is in there. Haram of Allah is the heart. Heart connects. What did Hussein do? He created a revolution of the heart. From this moment onwards, if your heart is connected, your life will change. Believe me, it's in these 10 nights. If these 10 nights don't give you your hajat, nothing will give you your hajat. These are those 10 nights. These are the nights of Zainab. These are the nights of Hussein. These are the nights of Zahra. If you have this is it. This is that time. Tonight is that time. As it dawns, that moon is coming. I'm going to give you a tradition. Think on this tradition. They say when the day of judgment comes, people are brought to mahshar. Allah gives the hukum, says, everyone come onto mahshar. Then he instructs the angels. He says, angels, I want you specially to go to that broken piece in Karbala. Raise my Hussein to the heavens, but be very careful. His body is still broken. Today when you go to Karbala, understand this. Ayatollah Sistani says, he says, don't look at the gold and don't look at the silver. Understand, Hussein's body is still broken today. How's that body broken? Look, let me give you a tradition. On the 13th of Muharram, they say, when Imam Zain al-Abidin came to bury his father, and the tradition says there was a man who was in chains. As the man was in chains, Banu Asad was standing there, didn't know what to do. You know what he says? He says, leave this particular body to me. He says, whose body is it? He says, it's my father's body. He says, how do you recognize it? He says, can't you see there's no place on his body left that hasn't been brutalized? They say when the Imam came there, he chucked himself on the body of his father, he began to cry. Takes his Abbas, puts it on the floor. Riwayat say, he says when he tried to lift his father from the shoulder, says his chest collapsed in. When he tried to lift the leg up, his hips collapsed in. When he tried to lift the arms up, the arms collapsed in. In this way, he takes the body of Sayyid al-Shuhada, puts all of it together. As he puts all of it together, he tries to put the body inside of the grave. One tradition says, he looks towards Najaf. He says, grandfather, come and help me. Says somehow he begins to put the body. Hussein's body today is still broken. Even though Hussein's body is broken, let me give you another tradition therefore. Hussein's body was broken, his head was cut, right? Hussein's head was cut. Eventually, the head was united with the body. You know what it says in the tradition? It says Hussein's head was hit so many times, bruised so many times, but certain times Hussein's head itself used to fall down. Final tradition. You know why Hussein's head fell down? Two traditions. One is this. Remember one thing. Sakina of Hussein's heart was a 4-year-old girl. They say when Hussein's head was united with his body, it says the face was completely bruised. It used to fall. In one of the traditions, it says Imam Hussein's head fell, it wouldn't get up again. They say people Shimur came and tried to hit the head of Imam Hussein. In the tradition, it says as he was hitting the head of Imam Hussein, Imam Zain al-Abidin said, he says, my father's head's not going to move like that. He says, why? He says, because my sister has fallen somewhere. Until my sister doesn't come, my father's head's not going to move. In the tradition, it says, Sayyidah Zainab says, son, I'll go and get your sister. She begins to walk. Eventually, she comes to a place. She says there's a tree there. Under the tree, there's a woman dressed in black there. That woman is holding a 4-year-old girl. She puts her hand over the 4-year-old girl's head. She rubs away the blood from her ears, the tears from her eyes. She's putting her hand on her head. In the tradition, it says, as Sayyidah Zainab goes forward, she just says one thing. She says, "O woman, may Allah bless you, because this is the yatima of my Husain. If there's anything you want, let me know." You know what this woman says? She raises her head and she says, "Zainab, don't you recognize me?" Says, "I don't recognize you." Says, "Zainab, look carefully and see, recognize me." Says, "Woman, I don't recognize you." Says, "Zainab, I'm your mother Zahra." One time it happened then. One time. Do you know the second time? Final time. Do your du'as. Inshallah, we'll continue the discussion tomorrow. You know what the final time was? Sayyid al-Shuhada's head fell again. When did Husayn's head fall? Tradition says this. When that 4-year-old girl was given ghusl and kafan, all of the women came running in. You go to Sayyidah Ruqayya, in the Ziyarat Nama, read at the back, all of the women, when they came to Imam Sajjad, they just said one thing. They said, "Mawla, can you tell us something?" Says, "Why?" Says, "When we pour water over the hair of this girl, her hair starts to shred." Says, "Mawla, why is her hair falling like this for?" You know what the Mawla replied? He said, "The reason why is this. Shimr would grab her by the hair and he would pull her by the hair in such a way, pull her by the hair, that today when the water is poured, her hair is shredding." At that moment, says, Imam Husayn's head fell again. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. For the sake of Muhammad and ala Muhammad, may Allah accept our worship today. They say that when you give a wasila, wasila is accepted. We pray with this wasila. Allah, for the sake of that moment, if you can imagine Husayn not being able to take this, then imagine Amir al-Mu'mineen, what he was taking. Allah, for the sake of that moment, when Sayyidah Zainab was standing on the bazaar of Sham, and Shimr was whipping Zainab on the back, and Zainab wasn't moving. For the sake of that moment, may Allah accept all of our du'as today, remove all of the difficulties in our lives, hasten to the hall of the Imam, and make us all part of his Ansar.